everybody. Thank you for checking out the Performance Anxiety Podcast on the Pantheon Podcast Network. I am your host, Mark. And back in the 90s, I discovered this great band led by James Hall. They were the opener for Maria McKee when I saw her, and I was a fan from the first note. The band's guitarist was Lynn Wright. Then after 2 albums, the band was done, and in the pre-internet days, it wasn't so easy to stay on top of your favorite artists, especially if they hadn't quite broken into the mainstream. So I'm beyond happy to have Lynn on the podcast. To begin with, I tried to sell him a Farfisa organ after he just got home from a flight from Berlin. From there, we talk about his musical career and his ever-changing sound and style. He's very open about how the music industry almost broke him. He took a break from it after leaving James Hall to work for a children's book publisher. But a stint with the Reverend Vince Anderson brought back Lynn's love of music. Since then, he's written his own music, recorded in a myriad of styles, including musique concrète. He has a lot of stuff he's preparing to release, even though COVID has been particularly harsh for him. Check out lynnwrightcomposer.com for new releases and info on where to see him live. He's currently playing with the Royal Arctic Institute, among other things. Follow him on Instagram at LynnWR_GHT. Follow us at Performance ANX on social media. And you can always help us out by going to ko-fi.com/performanceanxiety or performanceanx.threadless.com. So get a drink, get some snacks, and get ready to hear some great stories and wonderful music with Lynn Wright on Performance Anxiety on the Pantheon Podcast Network.
Perfect. All right. So I'll give you a brief one and then, all right. Hi, this is Lynn Wright, and you're listening to Performance Anxiety Podcast. That's okay. Okay, and then, all right. So I'm bad at saying all the bands. I don't even know where to start. So, okay, all right. Hi, this is Lynn Wright, and you're listening to Performance Anxiety Podcast. You can find out about all my upcoming releases at lynnwrightcomposer.com. And hopefully I'll see you with Royal Arctic Institute in February on the East Coast. I am jet lagged because my flight kept getting canceled on the way back. So I got back in the States about 4 hours ago.
Oh, wow. Do you want to do it another time?
No, I want to do it exactly right now because I just had some coffee and I'm feeling good and I need to get back on this schedule because I have to start working with somebody in 2 days. And I sleep on planes really easily. I'm fortunate. So I slept 6 hours today. But it's funny, you emailed Dana.
Yes.
And I was sitting next to her. And I said, wait till I leave. Actually, you emailed Dana and three of myself and the keyboardist from Bee and Flower, the original, and Dana were all sitting in a room with Simon Goff, who was our touring violinist when we got back together about 10 years ago.
Wow.
We're all kind of having a little going away meal with me and at Dana's apartment in Berlin. And then she got that. And then everyone's like, oh, let's wanting to chime in. And I said, look, let Dana answer when I leave.
Yeah, she told me when she got back, or she replied to me, she's like, he just left my apartment. He's heading back to the States. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize he was still over there.
Yeah, I stayed. It was a crazy trip,
Yeah.
I suppose the violinist Simon, I work with him a lot, and he had a tour opening for this band, Black Country New Road, from England, and I was going to go out with him, and then we're going to mix a record I just made that I guess will probably, because I'm talking to a few different labels, as long as it takes, come out in 2023. But
wow,
and we're mixing something else we're releasing. So we had studio work, but this whole tour, of course, COVID's really bad in Europe right now. Someone in the other band got sick.
Oh.
In England, we got the call the day before. Oh, it's not happening. So I just did studio work with him for the month, but I got to spend a lot of time with Dana and all my former bandmates and all my friends over there. So it was a great month, but it's awesome. Yeah. But they canceled my flight because they didn't say this, but judging from the number of people on the flight today, they were canceling flights because they didn't have enough people coming back.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's awful.
But it worked out. It worked out.
Good.
I'm not worried. Anyways, enough about that.
Enough about me. Let's talk more about me.
Well, I guess that's what we're going to do, right?
Yeah. Yes, sir. That's why we have connected. Oh, and there goes my dog.
Good. All right.
I don't know though. Sometimes he just thinks he hears something and then he'll just start going crazy.
I'm fine with dogs. I'm fine with kids. I like them both. Because you're one thing I liked once I found out about. I mean, when Danny was on your podcast, I listened to it. But then when Grant was on it, I started going back and listening. And one thing that's really interesting is you do cover a lot of ground.
Yeah.
You know, you'll go from, like you talked about, you talked to most of the Swans, but then you have a lot of great songwriters and roots players on the show. And that's, I appreciate just like that.
Well,
like, the fact that it's like, I'm not just doing doom metal and,
right.
Or I'm not a country podcast or what, because a lot of things are really specific, and it's great just to hear someone talking to musicians. So.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, a lot of podcasts will stay very genre specific, and I like a lot of different genres. And in fact, I've grown to enjoy a lot more genres because I've hooked up with some PR people who get me some of the people that you're talking about, like a lot of the Zydeco stuff that I've had on, like Corey Ledette and Dwayne Dupsy, Mark Bingham.
Yeah, and it's, I could appreciate Zydeco, but I didn't get it until I saw it live. And once I saw it live, then I was like, oh, now the records makes, now I feel it more. I mean, it made sense to me musically, but it was just, I listened to a lot of different kinds of music, and I was exposed to a lot of different kinds of music. But just seeing it live when I was living in Louisiana, I was just like, oh, I get this. And they're such great players. It's like I'm a bit in awe of like their technical ability.
Oh yeah, like I didn't know what a second line was. I'd heard of it, but I didn't know what it was until I had Chris Lackinac on.
Yeah. Well, the second line, man, I'm a huge. I was into that from the minute I heard it.
Yeah,
got it.
Well, how did you get into music in the first place? I mean, we talked about me a little bit now. How did you get into it?
Oh man, roundabout. Well, my brother. I have two brothers. They're both older than me, and the middle one, he was a great natural guitar player.
Oh.
And he, in the 70s, late 70s stuff, he was a bit more into like the blues, like the classic rock people from the late 60s, early 70s, and some blues. Yeah. And then, of course, he went kind of this shredder Van Halen type route. But he was into everything. He was into a lot of punk bands. So he taught me the basic chords when I was 9 or 10. And then he got my parents to buy me a bass, a little Fender Music Master when I was in middle school. And I think mostly he just wanted someone to play bass with him. And, briefly we had a punk band and I got into it. And then I kind of like, in high school, I was not sure. I wrote a lot. I wrote like prose and, poetry and stuff. I'm not saying it was great, but so I always thought that's what I would do. And so but then I got in high school, I played in like, the whole 80s Paisley Underground neo-psychedelic.
Oh, yeah.
I had a couple little of those kind of garage rocky, like Farfisa organ, distorted, blown out 60s guitars.
Hey, if you want one, I know where you can get a Farfisa. I know where one's for sale.
Oh, I was just talking to Dana about how I need to like minimize my amount of gear, but
Don Zantara's from Inner Ear Studios in DC. His is for sale.
I wish, but New York is not exactly the place to pile a bunch of gear up in an apartment.
Good point.
And I already have a storage unit to keep some of my stuff in. So I just went from that, and then I stopped playing for a couple of years. And
really?
But I listened, but I just wrote.
Was there a reason why you stopped playing?
Well, I wanted. I didn't know what I wanted to do. In other words, I didn't have the technical ability to do what I wanted to do musically. And I didn't my brother would teach me stuff. I didn't want to go that route. And I just got really interested in literature.
Okay.
And so I wrote. And then though, this funny story is I started thinking about playing music again because I was sitting in my bedroom, and I was living in Atlanta, Georgia. My family moved there for high school, and there were these two college radio stations left of the dial. One was RAS, typical college station of the 80s, and the other was WREK, which would play anything from Tuvan throat singing to like thrash metal to anything, all nice. Back to back. And they also had a good live show, and you know, you could hear anything. But in between them, there's this station that didn't come in really, but I was always, you know, what's that? And one day I'm turning between them and it came in, and there's this saxophone I heard. Actually, it was a bass at first. And I was like, what is this? And it was John Coltrane. Oh. And I knew of John Coltrane, of course, because he's like the jazz guy that all rock people got into, you know. And it was the piece India. Oh. And I just listened to the whole thing all the way through, and I said, what the hell did I just hear? And and, you know, of course, Friday rolled around, I had a little money. I went to the record store and I found it, and that was that. But I still, and so I started playing again. And then right after high school, my friend was the grandson of a folk artist named Howard Finster. Okay. Who did like a Talking Heads album cover, Little Creature and Little Creatures, and some REM album cover. And he was like, you know, a self-taught, like eccentric from North Georgia. And he had this thing called Paradise Gardens, a sculpture garden. And he also had these houses on it that weren't really lived in. And so the summer after high school, I moved up there with my friend. And we were working for him, and we started just having a band and, you know, one of the buildings there and playing. And of course, since he had done an REM album cover too, one of the roadies came by and said, oh, you have a band, gave us a bunch of like picks and strings. And oh, cool. So then I moved back to Atlanta and played in some bands, and that's where I met James Hall. Was my upstairs neighbor. Oh, okay. But then I said, you know, I don't know, I want to write. And so I stopped again for a year, and I wrote a novel, and I read the novel, and I said, oh, there's one good chapter and the rest of it's garbage. And I was working in a bar, and I was like, what am I doing? Oh, and before James had left, somehow we had made an album together that never got released. Oh, and it was 3 guitars and drums and some piano and very drony, like Spaceman 3. Do you ever heard of that band? Yeah. Or Loop? It was very much that style, but James never put it out. He was still in that band, Marry My Hope, at the time. Right. And he'd gotten some money from the label, and we just went in and made it one weekend. Oh, wow. And so I knew him, but I was like, you know, I want to play music. And so I called him up, and he's down in New Orleans, and he says, well, I'm writing music, I'm making music, but I don't know what I want to do musically. Do I want to have a band? Do I want to play organ in a church? I don't know what I want to do. But I'm thinking about it. And then he's, you know, I called him 6 months later, and he said, you know, I'm working with this drummer. So I went down there for 2 weeks, and I said, well, I'm going to move there and join his band. But so I just started practicing guitar 8 hours a day. And, wow. And so I really learned to play guitar when, you know, 18, 19, 20, like I knew how to play already, but that's when I really learned, and being in his band was really my musical education. So, you know, when James was your upstairs neighbor and you made this crazy album that he didn't tell me about when he was on the podcast, so I'm going to have to ask him about this. He probably doesn't like it, but I don't know what happened. I think actually the master tapes were lost in Katrina, like a lot of stuff. But well, did you guys ever play out together at that point? No. Okay. No, all I remember is like I wasn't playing much, and I went upstairs and he's playing me a song, and I mean, I might be wrong about this. He can correct me but I seem to remember I had this song and I played it and it just sounded good, us playing together. But I don't know, I might have played like a chord and it wasn't in there and he liked it. And so, he kind of put it in the song and, really I just sort of hustled my way into not that project. That just happened. But because I was playing bass mostly then, but then I kind of hustled my way into his band because early on when I played with him, it was just 2 guitars and drums, and we would tune our low E down to like whatever the key of the song was, and generally let it drone.
Oh wow!
Underneath it, and we were playing one night, and I don't know, James just never found a bass player, and then this bass player comes up to us and he says, "I really want to be in the band. I don't want to insult you. You don't need a bass player," and that was Grant, and so.
Yeah.
So I just kind of fell into music, and even, it was, so then, I just found like there was a long apprenticeship playing with him. So, and it ended up being a lot more than I ever thought it would be because I didn't know we were going to end up signed and all of this. So.
He mentioned the other day, I actually texted him to let him know you were coming on, and he said, I asked him if there's anything in particular, any good stories that I should ask you about.
Yeah,
I asked Grant too, but
Grant's the one who knows everything. But
James goes, he said there are so many stories. He says ask him about a frat party we played in Suwanee, Tennessee, where there was a lot of vomit involved.
Oh well, yeah. This is going to make me sound a lot more aggressive than I am as a person, but. Let me preface this by saying you have to understand in those days, like now it's a lot more civil. Like when bands tour, they generally, you make an album, you go out, you do 30 shows in the U.S., maybe you go to Europe or vice versa. But back then you just stayed on the road.
Right.
And before we had a record deal, that's the only way we could survive. So at this point, we've been playing at least 150 shows a year.
Oh, wow.
For a few years. I mean, there was, for some reason, I kept a list of like all the shows we played in a book, like where they were. And I kept this whole journal of all the shows. And I kept that all the way up until like 2000, until the internet consumed everything. And now I can just, look up somebody's website or go online or, social media. But so, and we at that point we were doing pretty well, and so suddenly it's like we've been on these tours opening for people, playing these venues, and someone said, and his manager and booking agent said, "You're playing a fraternity party outside at this kind of like small elite Southern college," and I'm like, "We're playing a frat party?" And they're like, "It's," and it was a money gig, and they were fans, and it was outdoors, and I'm like, and there is a real production. I'm like, all right, we're playing it, but there's people down front standing right in front of my pedal board, and they're really drunk. And they're hanging like solo cups of beer over my effects. And so, we had like a stage manager, guitar tech guy, and he's trying to keep them off of the effects, and the tour manager even goes out into the crowd and kind of tries to move them back, and nothing's working. And then I notice, oh, this guy's not only really drunk and going to spill beer on my effects, he's really drunk. Oh. And I see he's about to throw up. And just as he starts to throw up, he turns slightly, and I put my boot in his back, and I push, because I don't want him to vomit on my effects.
Yeah. And
so I push him into the crowd, and he throws up all over his friends. And I think he did get some on my effects. But, so, that was, it was, what was it, 90 something. It was, people were, it was the audience, shows could get interesting. But yeah, so that was that. Wow, I haven't thought of that story in a long time. But
well, I got to see you guys live one time.
Where was it?
It was in Philadelphia. You guys were opening up for Maria McKee.
Oh, that was a strange tour. I mean, I liked her. She was really nice. I liked her, and Bruce Brody who played on Easter by Patti Smith was playing keyboards.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't even
with
realize
her.
That.
Yeah, he used to play with John Cale, and so I liked him, and then so the band was great. It was just odd bill for us, and
well, you guys had that all over the place. Going back and kind of researching for James's episode, I mean, you went, if I remember correctly, you went straight from a Maria McKee tour to Rage Against the Machine.
Well, there are things in between. We toured with Love and Rockets, and then there was, I mean, what happened the first record when it came out? Everything made more sense who we played with in a way, because we would tour England a lot and play, and the bands made sense. But when the Geffen record came out, it was just such a mess with the label. And I mean, my memory of that record, we weren't even ready to make a record, and we found out very shortly. We were, the A&R guys. I wasn't even sure when we went to the studio. I thought, oh, we're just recording to see how this goes with this producer. But the A&R guy was leaving Geffen, and so he wanted the record done before he left. And in my opinion, James had written kind of 1/3 of 3 different records. And if you'd given him 6 more months, he would have come up with the perfect record. But things go as they go, and so no one knew what to do with it, because if you listen to the first song, We Should Be with a Heavier Band. If you listen to the second song, it makes perfect sense. We're out playing with songwriters. So we were on a lot of different tours. In the middle of that Rage Against the Machine tour, we hopped over to France and played with Frank Black. It was just that.
Jeez,
I can't even remember. I mean,
that's crazy.
I mean, we played with a lot of interesting lineups, like, and just strange. It was but by the time we were doing like the Rage Against the Machine stuff, I think a lot of us were kind of like, why don't we just make another record? Like, I like those guys, and it was fine being on that tour. They were great people, and I had, nice rooms, no problem doing it, but it was just, I was burned out by that point, and I was just like, it's just, it was, with him, I always preferred it live. I thought he never made a record that captured what he did.
No, and you're right.
That was disappointing to me, but by the time we got late into the touring for that album, I think not so much Rage, but after that, I was, it was kind of a job at that point. But not, I don't mean a job like I'm punching the clock, but I was happy that I was able to play music and get paid to do it, and to be, to hang out with people I liked. But it was just, it had lost, I mean, it never was bad live, because he's never going to be bad live. Right. And we could play together as a band, and we could make it. And once we got on stage, however we felt 5 minutes before it, it was great. And, he taught me a lot about that. He's like, I don't care if there's one person or 30,000. And with him, you played to one person and 30,000. Yeah. You play as if it's a room full of people who want to hear you. And no matter what, and that's a cliche to a degree, but especially in that era, I've seen a lot of bands come out and not care because it's not a good night. Yeah,
exactly. But I didn't get that feeling at all when I saw you guys. Obviously, I mean, it was if I remember,
we were happy playing that show, the Theater of
Living Arts.
Living Arts, yeah, I liked that show.
We came in, me and my buddy came in, and I think we missed like the first song, but we came in, and I remember a feeling of hope, because that's one of my favorite songs. I mean, even before I started this podcast and started reaching out to James and I listened to that album and that song in particular all the time. I absolutely love that song, and that whole first album is amazing. Show, we walked down and we were able to get right in front of you, in front of the stage. And James just pulls out this trumpet and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. This is going to be a different type of show. All right, I'm into it.
Yeah, it's funny. I never talk about this. Like after I was out of that band, it just kind of like I was in different music scenes and people didn't know about it, and I didn't really. I mean, to be honest with you, the post when he was going to make a third record, the label was kind of demoing him to death. They were trying to drain his money and all of this, and it was just like, try another producer, and then the one, like I don't know if anyone knows, but like then finally we had this guy Head, who was PJ Harvey's engineer, and now I think he's a live sound guy because he doesn't like digital recording. He's an analog guy, and he's brilliant. Yeah. And he's like, I want to work with him. And so he flew to New Orleans, but instead of saying we have to spend money and go into a nice studio, he just came and slept on Grant's couch. Wow. He said, I'm gonna rent some gear. We're gonna mic you up in your rehearsal space, and our rehearsal space sounded fine, and record the songs you have. And then he went back to England and he mixed like what he thought were the 4 or 5 finished ideas, and then one that was half finished. He like said the outro doesn't work. He faded it out and he gave it to us. In his mind, why am I wasting your money? I'm supposed to help you. And so for us, I think that, especially Grant and I, we were really excited by this. And we're like, we should work with this guy. But of course, the label was expecting him to like magically make some brilliant sounding thing that cost all this money. And so that side of it. So by the end of that, I was just like, okay, I was just done. Yeah. I was really done. And so when around, I guess, the beginning of 99, when I was living in New York already. Most of the time I still, like, New Orleans is so cheap. I kept a room in my friend's house, and it was like, I paid less combined rent than like a third of the rent I have to pay now. So but because I had a cheap apartment here too. And so I was just done with it. And it wasn't anything to do with them personally. I was just like, James was burnt. I think everyone was burnt out. And also I was just getting interested in so many different kinds of music that I just let it go. And so it's nice to talk about it because a lot of people don't know. But the funniest thing about that is I was the third rehearsal with Bee and Flower when I joined it, which was not that long after it was 99 or 2000. The violinist, or he's playing viola or whatever, he looks over and I never said anything. He says, wait a minute, you live in New Orleans? I said, and then he's like, did you play with James Hall? And I said, how do you know who he is? And he's like, oh, I used to go see you in Boston because he's from Boston. I says, I saw you play in Boston at this theater, and I saw you at a club down in New Orleans. I'm like, what? Oh, wow. And he and I still work together all the time through all these projects to this day. This guy, John Petro, is an amazing multi-instrumentalist who can just, a natural, the kind of guy who just you look at and we're all like, how do you do it? But so so it's good to talk. It's good to Grant and I stayed friends through all of this, and James and I've stayed in touch. But it's just sometimes the whole label, when you sign a big contract and then you don't sell lots of records, it's complicated.
Gets stressful for you, I'm sure.
Yeah, or it's just a lot of people thinking, I remember one conversation with some label person, maybe you should play a Les Paul Jr. through an orange amp. And I'm like, what? We're all,
so we should become Caius.
Or something. Or I don't know. You know what it was? He just had some little success with, what was that band? Urge Overkill. And that's what they were playing. And I'm looking at them like, well, we don't sound like that. What are you talking about?
No.
That was fortunately the only time. But
I loved your sound in James Hall. I mean, it was so fiery. Like the solo in Morning Lust is just incredible. That just blows me away to this day. It's just unreal.
thanks. I don't know if that was me or James, but one of us. But I can't remember. But but I'm saying I thought it was great. And the funniest thing, and I won't say much about it, but that same A&R person, I think we played a show later when we were in demo hell at some club, and our manager was managing the English songwriter Richard Thompson, genius guitar player.
Yeah.
And Richard happened to be at the show, and I'm glad I didn't know it. And then he came backstage, and I'm standing there, and he said, I really like the way you play. And that guy was standing within earshot, and I'd never heard a word about anything I did after that. I was like, I don't know Richard. I met him again when he's playing in New York through our manager and stuff. So, we had dinner or something, but I was like, hey, I didn't say it, but I was like, thanks. You did me a big favor. You just people shut up and left me alone. And let me play.
Now I don't have to go find an orange amp.
Yeah, exactly. Which I like, but I'm just saying it wouldn't have fit that bad.
Right. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. But your sound changed a lot once you left James Hall. When going back and looking at what I've been able to find, I know you worked with Cordero and Bee and Flower, and particularly Bee and Flower, the sound's a lot softer.
Man, Dana came from metal and heavy music. And I don't know, a lot of my approach is okay, how I ended up in Cordero or any of that is just that's something I haven't done.
Oh, cool.
But all right, well, sometimes I've joined things just because that's the last thing I think I would do. And so let me go see if I can play that and fit into it and still be who I am. But if you turned on a distortion pedal, a lot of the stuff I played in Bee and Flower was just very much more minimal than what I played previously. But Dana's point is she didn't even want a guitar player. She just wanted a steel player, and James had bought me a lap steel, and I didn't really play it. And I said, "Well, I can figure it out." And then she wanted it so minimal that it would just be part of the string section. So I was kind of just my job was to fit in with the violist. And then once she realized I was sensitive to her songs and her concept, she kind of oh yeah, you can play some chords, here or that. And so the point was it wouldn't be, it's the end of the 90s, beginning of 2000s, everyone was burnt out on just a wall of guitar. And so for me, it was a bit of a challenge. And then Cordero came out of that because Ani, who was drumming in Bee and Flower, was she wanted to do something entirely different. And that was just fun. And I had to learn all these different styles of music. Oh, all right. How does merengue, what is cumbia? How does merengue work? Because it's combining pop or traditional Latin styles with indie rock. And so that was just more of started out as a little side project that just kept going and going, and is kind of most things I've joined to. And that's how and there was just the viola player from Bee and Flower who switched to bass and played in her band, and it just happened, And
is that where your real love of Spanish music started to develop?
Yes and no. Well, when I was playing with James, when we were first going on tour, when we had no money and it was just really, and before that I was working in a restaurant, and there was this guy who would come in and he'd bake pastries. And I'm like, this guy's not a pastry chef. There's more to him than this. And it ends up, man, it would be an entire podcast to talk about this guy's fascinating life.
Oh,
but
wow.
he's a serious record and book collector, and he and his wife were just patrons of a lot of like artists. And they said, hey, you're going on tour. Well, look, we have a house and there's a room in the back. Just put your stuff in there. What, can you pay us $125 a month? I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, man, just that way you can afford and so they basically just let me pay what I could to them.
Wow.
And then as we started making money, they're like, hey, you want to split the house in half and pay us out the rent? But he had this enormous record collection with music from all over the world.
Oh, wow.
And films by every director you can think of, and a lot of jazz records. And I would come off tour and been on tour for 6 months. I just want to hang out at home, and I just sit there and listen to records. So that was the first place. But then Ani kind of gave me the opportunity to, okay, how do you play it? And that's where that came from. And then during the Cordero, the bass player and I got a job writing music libraries for a TV station, a TV network, where they give you genres, and it's like, you write 15 90-second pieces of music in that genre, instrumentals. And the first one was easy. It was like basically songs that sound like all the Brooklyn bands we played with. So we just we just imitated our friends. But then, at one point they said, can you we're starting a Spanish language show. And we have some writers who, are, Cuban or Mexican writers and doing different styles. But can you and they gave me certain styles they wanted, 3 salsa, 3 samba from Brazil. And so I spent a month just researching it. I hired like traditional players and went into the studio and just would like play whatever I could on the songs, like play bass. Wow. Like John and I would alternate on bass for the salsa stuff and then play guitar. And so that further developed it. And then briefly, I had a band with bassist Tony Mamoni, who was in a band Perubu and has played with everyone in their, mother.
Yeah.
And John and I, with three Colombian percussionists and some jazz guys that explored that further. And I went down a real rabbit hole of just like getting into African and South American music for a few years. And like, I'm not going to play rock. And at the same time, I was working for some composers playing on music for contemporary dance. And this was like early mid 2000s. And I got more into improv. And so I just went with it. And it kind of, I don't know. That's just what I've done. Oh, this sounds interesting. Let's learn something new.
So was that And the Wiremen?
No, this was before that.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And during it, like I just play with, I'm always doing a lot of different projects. And I was just this composer I'd met in New Orleans named Chris Becker, but he moved to New York, and he would just, there's a trumpet player who plays with a New York jazz guy, William Parker. He would just put me in these situations with musicians who I would never expect to play with. It's like, so we would go in to work with this dance company, and it's me and then the composer doing electronics, and then Flip, who's a world-class jazz musician, and he's like, oh, we have the singer Helga Davis, and she's like working with Robert Wilson, and she's schooled, and so at that, I liked it because it pushed me. I actually went back and started taking guitar lessons around 2008, just to because I was self-taught. And I learned how to read music at some point. I'm not a great sight reader, but I just I got to tie all of this together because I don't know how all these fragments make sense together. And theoretically, but no, And the Wireman grew out of, I had been a collaborator and I co-written songs with people. Okay. But I helped people finish songs, but I'd never really written songs. And one day I wrote a song, and I thought it would be for one of the artists I was working with. and it ended up not being. So I had a few of these ideas. And Grant said, well, why don't we demo one of these songs? And I was down there with him in the studio, and we did. And I said, oh, man, I should make an album where I just get all these different singers I work with to come in and guest on it. And then I forget, a little while later, Grant's like, look, I'll record the record for you, but on one condition. I said, okay. He says, you have to sing everything.
Some rasping chain betwixt the river, switch and cane. All nothing gives when long is the way. Beauty wailing, and all you know, the screen, the gaze, betwixt ruby stove.
And so I did it, and I just did it out of pleasure, because at the time I was doing much more experimental music in general.
Okay.
And I just wanted to do songs. But on that, there are, like, the drummer who I've been working with, who introduced me to all the Colombian music. He played a lot of the stuff on that, percussion, and I don't know. I didn't even know I was going to release that. And that's just been something that's been an on again, off again project that, I have something I recorded in 2017 with that band that a label was going to put out. Then COVID happened and they backed out. So I'm just going to put it out, though. And
oh, good.
I have a lot of stuff coming out. I realized, wow, I made a lot of music in the last 3 years, but in the next 4 or 5 months, I have 4 or 5 or 6 different releases.
Oh, wow.
Gonna happen.
That's awesome.
So I was like, oh, wow, I guess I have done something. So
you never sang before? Was that something you ever did in your spare time, or in the shower?
I sing in B and Flower. I sing backup.
Oh, that's right.
I sing harmony. And I would, but like one time in like early 90s, I was sitting in Grant's apartment and I sort of played around with writing this song, and I sang a little, and Grant's like, you got to do stuff like that. And I'm like, nah, I don't, because it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And then one day I just wrote this song, and I was like, oh, I actually can live with that. But I was going to give it to another singer, because I was just like, no one wants to watch me front a band, because I've been a side person for since, for 15, 16, 17 years at that point. And then, but, around that time is when I also just decided I like doing a lot of different things with a lot of different people. And that way you don't get stuck. It just keeps it fresh.
Yeah, you don't stagnate.
So, and that's around the time, like, Grant and I would just do projects together, different people in New York. And then I got into composing B and Flower did a couple films, and I got into composing for dance, like a dance company here. And,
wow.
And that allowed me to do whatever I wanted. Sometimes it'd just be music concrete I'd make with sounds, and other times I did a piece where it's a lot of percussion and brass, and that's mostly it. No guitar, no anything, just...
Yeah, Grant was saying that you guys, when you were living together, you guys did some really creative stuff.
Oh, yeah. What we used to do when we would get burnt out, we were playing with James, we just go down to the rehearsal space at 4 a.m. And we were playing this, a lot of it was real drone-based music, but we just do whatever. We wouldn't think about it. And that's kind of how, when he had me come down to New Orleans to make that Ballroom Dance Is Dead record with him, that's how that came about. He's like, I want to make a record where the bass lines are all just ostinato parts like we used to do in the space, but then we'll go from there. And then the India thing, which dates back to the cover, Grant mentioned you're familiar with that.
Yes.
back to when I heard it, but on one James Hall tour is when his wife was pregnant. He had to fly back to New Orleans before a show, and we were opening for somebody. And instead of canceling the show, they just said, well, why don't you guys go out there and do something without him? And so we're like, well, there's those two instrumentals, you know, because we improvised a lot in that band too. Like we would change songs on tour and they would just evolve into other things.
Oh, that's so cool.
So we said, well, let's do long versions of those two instrumentals. And I had been fooling around with like basically as a version of India you heard, something like that, just sitting around in the hotel room. And so we went out and played it.
Oh, man.
And we're like, oh, whatever, we're just going to have fun. The audience is not going to get it, but the kids love it. We were in some weird place. We were like in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but the people loved it.
Oh, that's great.
And we're like, oh, we pulled it off. All right, cool. You know, so all of this was, you know, happening about the same time. And I just, then Bee and Flower got back together. And so, you know, it's just like, I don't know. I just fall into stuff and go with it.
Well, and it's just such a wide variety of stuff, because I was listening to and the Wireman, and it's just this really cool, like, all right, so the song Before He Gave Up the Ghost. Sounds like Spanish noir. It's just amazing. I love it. And then Rayuela, that starts off like super menacing, but then becomes like the slinky track. I love that. It's so great.
Well, the first record, like the full one, the thing is there was a certain eclecticism, because some of the more rhythmic stuff I was writing with other people in mind at first.
Oh,
Just at first.
Yeah.
And then I just said, you know, then once Grant, you know, lay down the law of, you know, if you want to be able to, you know, if you don't want to pay me full freight or whatever, well, he's going to call me about that and say he didn't say that. But he did insist I sing on the album. But so that's how it came about. And then I'm fortunate, I know, like, and then I did some more recording up here with Tony. And, you know, who really working with Tony is I have a few key people I've worked with. And then another thing was in Bee and Flower, I met this guy, Paul Watson.
Okay.
Who was playing in a band that was around New York called Blasco Ballroom, but he had been a member of Sparklehorse. Do you remember that band? He played guitar and cornet and Sparklehorse.
Okay.
But it ends up he has a long history. In the 70s, he was mostly a free jazz player on trumpet. Wow. And then he got into like this band, the Orthotonics, which was a punk era band that kind of blended like punk and jazz. And
oh, wow.
So he's this incredible, and then he got into play. He plays everything, you know. So I just was thinking of him, and I'm like, I really want to work with, because I've been working with some trumpet players. I want a trumpet player, but I want one that's sensitive to the song. And so I just called him up, and I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, well, not that much, you know. And he lives in Richmond, so he started working, and he kind of became the, you know, second person, the you know, core member of that group when it worked. But he, unfortunately, around the time we made that first record, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, he stopped touring a few years ago, and that's, you know, even though that band still exists, that's kind of when it doesn't, you know, I mean, we have a great sax player, Nicky D'Agostino now, but it's just, you know, it was hard.
That's tough,
a mentor, a fantastic musician, and you know, he's still around. But he can't. You know, he still creates, but it's limited. You know, he can play some synth, he can play some text work, and it's, you know, it's a rough disease. You know.
Oh God, yeah. It's heartbreaking what it does to some of the most creative people. That it's just.
So that's just. At one point, I'm like, wow, I've been way too eclectic in all the music I've made in my life. You know, maybe I should have just stuck to something. But I feel like I'm at a point now where it's all kind of timed together. And it's, you know, I'm glad I did it, you know.
I saw some interesting things. I haven't even really been able to dive too deep into these. ALN, This Is Where. And,
the stuff I did with Norman and Algis.
Yeah, and the new stuff you're doing with the Royal Arctic Institute.
That's like a funny, like kind of project during the pandemic. You know, I got COVID really early on, and
wow.
like a lot of people. But then it attacked my nervous system. So for about 6 or 7 months, I had long haul COVID, and I had a couple, like a mini stroke, and it was just like all kinds of. But it was just coming and going. I was feeling fine most of the time, but the record I just mixed, I recorded it at home during all that time, and just me. But I get a call from the guitar player from Royal Arctic Institute. He's from Alabama, and he used to come see James Hall play. And I hadn't seen him for years, and he moved to Austin, ended up playing with Rocky Erickson, who was in the 13th. Yeah. He played with him, and I just ran into him at some show in New York, I don't know, in 2000 something, like 8 years ago, probably. And
oh my gosh.
And we reconnected, and he's into a lot of music I'm into, and we would jam sometimes, but he called me up and it was the summer of 2020, last summer, and he said, "Hey, I'm making an EP with my band. Would you come play some guitar solos on it?" And so I went in and played lead guitar on 3 songs, and that was that. But then there wasn't a lot happening. And he said, "Well, we're going to write another EP. Do you maybe just want to, I'll have a guitar here for you." I'm like, "Oh, well, that's great. Ultra lazy. I'll just show up with a few effects pedals and just take the train out to Hoboken. And, whenever you can, we rehearse Saturdays and maybe help us write the next EP." And so it's just during the pandemic, I go out there and play with them, and it ends up the rhythm section. They were in this band Das Damen, which was around the 80s. And but how I knew them was they backed up Arthur Lee from Love when he came back in the early 90s. And James opened for Arthur Lee at the 930 Club. And I spent time talking to the bass player. So basically it's these 3 guys, and it's funny because they're kind of like the backing band for the crazy 60s, acid casualties. Yeah. And they have this great keyboard player, Carl Bagley. And so we developed, we came up with 6, 7 songs, and they kept 4 of them. It's all instrumental. And then the bassist from Yo La Tengo, who they're friends with, was like, all recorded in Yo La Tengo's studio / rehearsal space. So we went in and did it live. And jazz style, and there's a few overdubs, but nothing, they're just additional sounds or textures. And that comes out February 4th. It's on digital and then cassette label. And it's, that's great. It's a whole other, it's a side, I get to just play guitar, and I really love working on that, just.
Oh, I thought it was beautiful because the guitar is kind of, I don't want to say maybe sparse. I don't know, but it's very gentle.
Yeah, it is.
And I loved it. Oh, it was so good. That first track, I think it's called "Fishing by Lantern" or something. I love it. Yeah, it's you get. I'm like, I get to go play through a nice Fender amp and play. There's effects all over, but play clean and melodically, and because the album, like you said, the ALN, which is really just the same thing as This Is Where. It's just Norman Westberg. I was going to ask you about that because I'm actually editing the episode I recorded with Norman Westberg right now.
All right, multitask. But no, so that just came. Algis and I were hanging out a lot and playing. And we actually, for a while, were doing this. It never became a band. It was Dana and Algis both on bass.
Oh,
And I
wow.
was playing guitar, and then this drummer, Vinny from Unsane, was drumming, and then a poet who was in a band called Enablers, Pete Simonelli, who's great, was fronting it, but it's just, we, recorded lots of jams and rehearsals. It never became anything, but Algis and I were doing some duo shows, largely improvised, but based on certain parameters. Algis was set up, and then I guess we did a night where it was, we played, and then Norman played, and then the three of us played together. And so Algis just started recording. We did it some more, and he started recording it, and the first release was just club recordings, and then the This Is Where recording was just, we went into a basement and improvised, and then chose the sections that worked, and then Algis and Norman mixed it, and it came out. That was great. I do a lot of stuff like that, and it's good to have, but a lot of it hasn't been on record. It's just been live. So it was nice to have it come out on record, and they're great people to work with. I mean, Norman, I love the way he plays. So.
Yeah. Norman was just awesome. I love that guy to death. He's so cool.
Yeah. And so for me, and I was always a fan of Swans and a fan of theirs. And so to get to work with them, it was a lot of fun. It was great. And, hopefully we'll do something again. So
you said you've got a bunch of things coming out over the next few months. What can you tell us about what's coming out?
There's a producer in town named Eric Hogemeyer, and he and I did something in the vein of what I did with Norman and Algis. And its project's called ISU, I-S-U, but said like it's Spanish. It means nothing. I mean, if you spelled it Y and put a gap, it could be like the middle of a conjunction in a sentence in Spanish. But what we did is we were just talking about site-specific areas. So we took some battery-powered instruments and went into a tunnel in Central Park and recorded something, and then went to the studio and put some real textural, put some synths on it, like modular synths and guitars that are really treated. And then we went to an old church and did the same thing. And then we cut it up into 5 pieces of music, and then I added just layers of voices, not lyrics, but just as textures in the background here and there. And he put some beats in it, and that's going to come out in January. And it's on our own Sonamidium music label. It'll be, I think, digital, because I don't think we're going to wait the 10 months it takes for vinyl, unless if somebody comes along and says, I'll do the vinyl, we'll do it, because it's just a side project. And then I'm finally going to release the last batch of Wireman recordings. We put out a couple of them as singles, but in February we're going to release the whole album.
Oh, awesome.
And then February 4th, we have the Royal Arctic Institute. And then March or April, Simon, who is the violinist who played with Bee and Flower, who's a fantastic composer and producer and everything. He has a great solo album. His name's Simon Goff. He's a solo violin album. He, fortunately, keeps me working a lot. But we did a film score for a Swedish director, and it ended up better than we thought it would. And so that gets released, I think. I mean, he's a busy man with managers who schedule these things. So I think it's coming out in April or March or April. And so that is, and then during the pandemic, I was also jamming again with Tony and and Peru, and then John from Cordero, Bee and Flower, and then Eric, I did the Isu album with, came into it, and we've recorded a bunch of music that we're probably just going to release as a series of singles. And I'm not sure when we're starting that, but I imagine it'll be in the next few months. And I think the temporary name is Red Cat, but I don't know if we all agree on that. But I'll put it out there. I think we do, but I don't want to. So, but it's fantastic as always. Anytime I get to work with Tony and John and those people, it's fantastic. And so that's coming out. And then hopefully this record I just recorded that's under my own name, that probably, because it's going to take a while with the label, probably won't be out till 2023, but I'm should start playing some shows with it.
Oh, awesome.
And that's kind of, if you took what I did with Norman and Algis and organized it and made it compositions and put vocals on it. It's hard to explain. It's where, if you're a song person, you'd hear the album and say it's compositions. If you're a composition person, you hear the album and say it's songs, but there's no lyrics. It's just layers of textural guitar and layers of voices and some synths playing the bass lines. And, so that's something I'm really excited about, because I feel it ties together a lot of what I've been doing. Mm-hmm. And then also in the spring, probably just online, I'm going to put out some of the music I've written for dance companies over the last 10 years.
Oh, awesome.
I'm going to remix some of that and flush it out a little so that it makes sense as just a listening experience without the movement. So I'm putting my website back up online the next week. So if people go there, I'll have links to all of this. It's just lynnwrightcomposer.com. So.
Oh, great.
But yeah, I'm just kind of cleaning out what do they have, photo dumps on social media. The next few months are going to be my giant music dump.
Right.
But that doesn't mean the music's disposable. It's great music. All means a lot to me. I just need to get it out there. So. The pandemic kind of interrupted a lot. So
I'm really excited to hear this stuff. The way you're describing it sounds like it's just stuff that's right up my alley.
I'll send you stuff from the tracks we're talking about. I'll also send you something off the album that will probably not get released till like winter 2023. Just one of those, because I think I'm really proud of it. Simon did a fantastic job mixing it, and I didn't
know about Simon until Dana emailed me back and told me about it. And I listened to Veil today. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, that is an incredible album.
Look, he is changed. Like, he just is. Like, he's become somebody that anytime he says, "Do you want to work on something?" I say yes, and I trust him. Like, I asked him to produce the record. I just said, one, I wanted somebody younger to produce it. I didn't want someone who had any of the history I had. Two, I have a lot of respect for him as a musician, mm-hmm. and also as a producer and an arranger, etc. And I just wanted somebody. I just wanted somebody with a different point of view to come in. But what's interesting, I did a little recording with Tony because I don't have an organ at home, and I wanted an organ. And you're recording in an apartment in New York. Occasionally, you have to run something through a different amp. So I did about a day with Tony, doing a little of that. But I got a setup at home, and it sounds, just set up some amps and things, and it sounds good. But I'd send him things, and he would write back and say, it was really just simple, but he just, composition suggestions and arrangement suggestions. And then I went over there to mix it. Like I said, we were supposed to go on tour. He was doing a Veil tour opening for somebody.
Oh, okay.
And I've never tour managed anybody, but he said, I've been on tour so much my whole life, I was going to go out and tour manage him.
Oh, wow.
Just because who wants to drive around Europe on their own?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's some long drives. And I said, no, I'll go do it. And then we'll mix my record, because I was going over there anyway. But it got canceled. A lot of things are locked down in Europe right now. And
yeah.
So we mixed our record, and I helped him out on a little, just with some engineering stuff on another project. And he's become kind of what Grant was, Grant still is, but, he's become another one of those people that I just work with a lot. And like Dana is too. I mean, I'll work anything Dana asks me to do, I'd say yes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I love her work.
She's such an amazing musician and, writer. I just love working with her. So,
well, she's so sweet. She got, like you said, as soon as you guys were done, she emailed me back. And in fact, this is one thing I did want to ask you about before we wrap this up. Shilpa Ray.
Oh, that's a funny aside. My friend Rich Hutchins was drumming with her, and she, she's just she's a strict solo artist, and she has different bands she's used over the years, and she put out I forget, it's one record she put out, and I'd heard some songs off it, and I'd liked, but Rich was drumming with her, and the guitarist couldn't tour. And so she, he just suggested that they were doing a European tour and an American tour. And he suggested me as a guitar player. And since I also sing, because she had a lot of background vocals on that album. So I, went in and learned the music and rehearsed with her. And it's funny, I forget what I think Simon and I were, maybe the Wireman record were finally releasing. We were finishing that in Berlin. So I just sat in his apartment for 2 days and figured out all the songs. And then for some reason, right before I have to do things, I'm always flying back to New York, and jet lag. But I went in and rehearsed with her, and she's an amazing singer and a great songwriter, and so I just learned, all the guitar parts, and we did, I think, was this 2017, 18, something like that. We just did we did a tour, and it was a lot of fun, and I don't do a lot of get in the van in America anymore. Just, I probably would for my own music, but I just, look, you got to understand with James, I think I played 20, I don't know, man. It's a ridiculous amount of full American tours.
God.
I don't even want, not that, but we just, at one point, we just stayed on tour. Like 93 into 94, we were just on tour. All the time. And I don't know. I think it's great. I think it's
that's got to be tough, though.
Not when you're in your 20s. Are you kidding me?
Well, I guess so. I guess not. Okay.
That's not tough. Tough is when, come on. Tough is trying to work 2 jobs and raise 3 kids on your own. That's tough. It's like,
I guess I'm looking at it.
Tough life.
I'm looking at it through my late 40s eyes right now.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. So now, looking at it, I'm not going to go out and get in the van and slug it out in a bunch of clubs when I'm 51 years old. Yeah. But I do like playing, and I like going out and touring. And she had a fantastic band, and
that's some really cool music. I was listening to it today.
Yeah, so I played, but that was just more of I got hired into the tours. It's not anything I contributed to or wrote or, I just played other people's parts and did what she wanted me to do. And it was, I'm glad I got to do it. It had been a while since I was strictly a side person with somebody. And that was, that was great.
Well, just before we started recording, Dana sent me another email and said, ask him about Reverend Vince Anderson, too.
Oh, yeah, this is great. Okay, so when I guess it was February 99, I was just basically, I was in a relationship with a woman in New York. I was living here. I would just go, James would call me, say, hey, let's rehearse. I've written some songs. And I go down there, and we were burnt out, and I was done. And basically I told myself, I'm going to hold on till the next record. And then if the record is, something makes us all happy, I'll tour. If not, I'll make the record and I'll leave. Because I was just burnt.
Yeah.
I wasn't even playing. Like, I was playing, but I didn't have the passion I had. And then, so James and I just sat down and decided, it's time. We both got to go do different things.
Yeah.
And so, and then shortly thereafter, there was like 2 months later, there was no band. So everyone was in the same boat. It's just, so I came to New York and I was like, man, what am I, somebody called me up and I forget who they were saying I should go audition. I think it was with Rufus Wainwright. And then someone else called me up and said, don't go do it. And I said, what do you mean? They're like, you're burnt. You don't want to deal with this stuff. He's not, I don't know what was going on with him because I don't know him at all. I didn't do the audition, but they're like, it's not going to be fun. It's incredible music, but it's not going to be fun.
Right.
You're burnt out. Just you'll end up just hating everything. So I just said, forget it. And I think I went to LA and James's manager called me. I played with somebody, and then I didn't dig that either. So I just came back to New York, and I was like, man, I don't know. And I just got a job.
Oh, wow.
I was like, for the first time, because I've been playing with James, I got like a regular. My friend worked at a children's book publisher, and I basically just went there and so funny. I went in there and I didn't, I've been a musician. I was fortunate. I'd just been a musician. And
yeah.
It's like, there's this computer, and I'm like, she and her boss just kind of snuck me in and taught me how to do everything. Okay. This is Excel. This is Word. This is, and so I was like their assistant, I guess. And it was fine, but I actually enjoyed it because I was just like, for once, I was home. I was seeing my partner, every day, because she had worked for Polygram Publishing. Our whole relationship was like, all right, meet me here. All right, I'll be home for 2 months. Okay, that's the hard side. That's the only hard side of touring is relationships. But I just I didn't know what I wanted to do musically, but this guy, Reverend Vince Anderson, who's an institution at this point, he's an amazing guy, an incredible piano player.
Oh, wow.
And he's been doing a weekly show in New York since the 90s. And there's just a documentary out about him, if you want to see it, called The Reverend.
Yeah, I saw that. I was trying to find music for the album, The 13th Apostle, and I could only find one track.
It's all right. You don't need his stuff later is better. I mean, you don't need to dig that out. But no, I'm not saying because it's bad, but I'm just saying compared to what he went on to do. But what happened is I knew a guy from some label who, the whole James thing, and here in New York, and I knew what it was. He had worked for TVT, but I think he worked for this label Fiction, which is basically just The Cure.
Oh, okay.
And so I was hanging out with him and this guy, Chris Perry, who managed to cure, I don't know, this stupid music industry stuff, but we would go out to dinner a lot. Okay. And he's the funniest guy. This guy, Lynn, they named him after Lyndon B. Johnson, but I won't call him Lenny Johnson. And he said, let's go see this guy, the Reverend. He's kind of like a gospel Tom. At the time, he's more Tom Waits, but if he played piano like Fats Waller or something, and it's true. And so he was doing something for a compilation album, and we just went in the studio, and I played a Chuck Berry solo, and it was fun, and it was powerful. And then, so when I came back to New York, and I got this job, and I just didn't I'm like, I don't know, I want to love music again, And he was doing a weekly gig at the Continental, which was mostly, it's an indie club, a punk club, whatever, whatever you wanted to call it at that point in time. But every Sunday night, he would just play 3 sets. It was free, get a cut of the bar. And he normally, it's like Barry, at that time, it's Barry sax, upright bass, and drums. And he always has amazing bands. His sax player, she's phenomenal. And he just said, why don't you come, because I'd done some shows with him earlier, and he's like, why don't you come, sit in and play? And so I'm down there playing 3 sets a week every Sunday night. And it's like no pressure. There's no record deals. There's nothing. There's just playing music. And the third set was always just, crazy. And then I guess I walk up and there's this dude on bass and, subbing for his bass player playing electric. And I don't know, I was sound checking my guitar and I played I just heard Al Green on the radio. So I started playing Love and Happiness, just like fooling around, because I love Teeny Hodges. What a great guitar player, and great tone. So bass player's like, man, I love that song. And it ends up it's Tony, who I still work with. So,
wow.
it's so I just, I played with him and I forget, it was like 6, 7, 8 weeks. And then his bass player came back and they were going back to the original lineup. But at that point I was like, wow, I love music again. That's awesome. All it took was 2 months of like just playing with people. And then Ani moved to New York, Ani Cordero, and that's how the whole Bee and Flower thing, she came up to me and said, I'm playing with this singer Dana. And she needs somebody to, you have a lap steel, don't you? I'm like, yeah, I'll figure it out. So that's kind of how the Reverend, and I played with him a bit around then, but I was just, I was doing other stuff, touring with other people, working. And so, I didn't continue, but his band now is just fantastic. And they play every Monday at Union Pool, as, anyone who's seen the documentary knows, but he's something special, you just gotta, it's what he does. Just it's great music, but it's also just great for the community. And it's great that society has somebody like that guy doing what he does for people beyond music. Even he's just a great human being and a great character.
Oh, that's wonderful. When you go to support the new releases, are you going to be playing outside of New York at all, or are you going to just kind of stick locally?
With Royal Arctic Institute, there's going to be, I just got some dates from them, and I think I'm going to be able to do all the shows with them. But no, there's going to be, we'll be playing in February in Providence, Boston, New Hampshire, Portland, Maine, Maryland. There's a date in Maryland. I'm not sure exactly where in Maryland, but cool. I just found out about that. And also here in New York. And then I think for the time being, the other stuff will just be local. But I'm looking, and later in 2022 and 23, I'll probably start with my solo stuff, touring it and playing it more. And I've gotten this habit of just like playing more in Europe. It's just been easier for me. And what happened is in Bee and Flower, when we got back together, Dana had moved to Berlin, and the band had been based in Berlin. So when we got back together, even though most of us were living in New York then, some were in Berlin, we just toured Europe. And then Wireman mostly toured Europe, though we would do some East Coast things. So, I would like to be able to do some East Coast shows, and I might do it. I just haven't. The last year was kind of, with my health and everything, just a little like I didn't know what was, I was waiting to see. So I'm going to set some things up. So for now, it's mostly been studio, and there will be those dates with Royal Arctic Institute. So that's
awesome. Well, if the Maryland shows, nothing in Maryland is too far away from me, so hopefully I'll be able to get out there.
Where do you live?
I live in Winchester, Virginia.
Ah, okay.
I am 75 miles due west of DC.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know where you are. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I love this area.
Spent a lot of time in because of Paul Watson from Sparkle Horse. Like Wireman used to play in Richmond all the time.
Okay.
And I would also back him up doing solo stuff or improvised stuff. So I've spent a bit of time in Virginia.
I love it here. I moved up here from Alabama, but.
Oh, really? Where in Alabama are you from?
Okay. So I lived in Alabama for about 10 years. My wife is from there, and all 3 of my kids were born there. But it was way down southeast Alabama. Like, I'm not sure if you know where Dothan is.
Yeah, I know where Dothan is.
Okay.
I lived in New Orleans and in Atlanta prior to that. So, and James used to tour the Southeast.
Okay.
That was our rent. That's what I called our rent circuit.
Yeah.
You go play 6 or 7 shows around the region and come home, and you can eat.
Oh yeah, he's telling me about playing Tuscaloosa a lot. But I lived about half an hour west of Dothan, right off of Fort Rucker.
Yeah, John from Royal Arctic Institute is from Mobile. That's where I first met him.
Love Mobile. I love Mobile.
Yeah, but it was odd. We used to play, there's a club in Pensacola called Sluggos. Did you ever know that club?
I've heard of it, but I've never been. I didn't go to too many shows because I moved down to Alabama and then got married a couple of years after that and had kids, and then the money was just... Oh, man,
just say no more. Say no more. You have kids, and your kids are your life, and that's how it should be.
Oh, yeah, but we used to go up there. I used to go to Tuscaloosa, Montgomery, Atlanta. In fact, one of the few shows I did get to see down there was Steve Vai in Birmingham, and I missed Tone Loc playing in a bar in Dothan.
What? How does that happen?
I don't know.
Well, no, I'm not talking about you missing it, but I'm talking about how does Tone Loc play Dothan?
I don't know. This was because I was married at the time, which is probably why we didn't go. So you got married in 2001, so it's probably 2003 or so. So he wasn't exactly at the height of his career, and it was just at some dive bar in Dothan. It's just crazy. I wanted to go.
That probably would have been great.
I would have loved it, but I think we saw it, and then I think, if I remember correctly, we just kind of forgot about it. And then, like a week or two afterwards, I'm like, "Oh, wasn't Tone Loc playing?" Yeah, that passed. Urgh. I don't listen to a whole lot of it. I don't know much of it. I never got into it when it was, when I was young. I was into the heavy stuff, but I do like certain artists. Like, I really like Tech Nine, and I love Hop Sin. But
oh wow, yeah.
But you get the big names. I'm just it's just boring to me. I like the guys that kind of stretch it and make it add humor to it, or just some weird something out of left field. So that.
Yeah, I went through when hip hop when they still called it rap and it was first coming out. I was really into it, and then I think kind of the golden age from like the late '80s through the late '90s, I was really into a lot of it. And there's still, like, to me though, I think what's interesting now is the underground stuff, like you said, the people who just don't. They just do something different. They take it in a different direction.
Look, I liked Ray Sremmurd for a while.
Yeah.
But
it's just so, I don't know, man. There's so much music. It's hard to keep up with it.
It's so hard. It's hard to find. It's hard to find new stuff that you like because there's just so much to go through.
That's why I like working with younger musicians. And I do it whenever I can, is because one, they turn you on to music you haven't heard, but two, I think we were this way. Everyone kind of digs back through the music from when they were young, 20 years earlier or something. Yeah. And there's stuff you miss when you're around in an era, because like you said, you're just listening to heavy music or whatever. And then somebody comes along and said, "Oh, this band from back then." You're like, "What? They were around when I was in my 20s? I don't remember them. I thought I knew everything from that era."
That happened to me so many times. I've like Swans. I knew of Swans, but like the first thing I heard from them was White Light from the Mouth of Infinity when it came out, and it kind of freaked me out. And I was just like, I don't know if I can get into this. And then I let it go until Leaving Meaning came out. And then I don't know if you know Howard Wolfing, right?
Yeah, he is the publicist.
Yeah,
I think he's been the publicist for a couple of things I've toured or played on. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, he's for the Royal Arctic Institute. Yeah, he's.
Well, yeah, but in the past, I
Yeah, well,
definitely.
He reached out to me and was like, "Hey, because basically anybody he sends to me, I'll have on because I trust Howard. He's sent me some great people. A lot of the music I was telling you about, the New Orleans stuff, Louis Michaud and all those guys." Most people on Nouveau Electrique, I've had on because of him, and so I think he kind of did me a favor because he's like, "Hey, Michael Gira is doing some limited press." He's like, "If you're interested, I'll kind of put you on the list, and maybe we can get you him on the podcast." I'm like, "Yeah, it'd be great." So now he's like, he confirmed it. I'm like, oh, wow, now I have to go look up some Swan. I got to go listen to old Swans. Like, okay. And then I started realizing how much was out there. I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to get caught up. And I just started listening like, I missed so much of this. I know I could have seen them live so many times or had all this music, and I missed it all.
Yeah, I mean, I was into them in the 80s, and then when James was in Bury My Hope, they opened for Swans like
Wow.
5 or 6 shows, and I saw, and then in the 90s, I kind of just got into, like I was aware of the albums, I heard them, but I wasn't focusing on it, and then with Angels of Light, I knew people playing in the band, and I liked the band, and I liked the music, and I, got back into it. And I think all the records they've made since they've come back are just, phenomenal records, and just, they're great. But in the last one they made,
the title track is just haunting. That gets in my head. Leaving Meaning just stays in my head for days. It's just so spooky and beautiful. It's just that piano line in that is just unbelievable.
So it's great, and but there's all kinds of because if you get on a kick with music, like, all right, I'm going to go explore this kind of music for a while. Well, while you're exploring that, there's like 20,000 other things happening.
I know. And you can't listen to it all. And then I get frustrated because I want to listen to it all, but
it's like I played on an electronic record not that long ago, and and I was surprised they want a guitar, but basically I just treated my guitar with lots, heavily affected, but that's a whole other thing about like EDM. It's like there's like so many subgenres. I'm just like, don't even tell me what they are. Just tell me who the artist I should listen to.
Oh, I had a band on a pretty heavy band, really cool, called Astronoid.
Okay, yeah. I saw that. I haven't listened to that podcast yet.
Oh, Brett Boland, that dude's talented. It's a great band. And I think, if I remember correctly, they created their own genre kind of as a joke. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was hilarious because we talked about how many genres and subgenres of genres there are. And I'm like, people just make up their own, and there's only one band in this genre. And they're like, oh yeah, we kind of did that. I think it was like they made up a genre called like Dreamcore or something, and it was hilarious. And they stuck that on their Bandcamp page. And I think they're the only band in that genre.
Yeah, no, but it's whatever. I mean, I get it. Labels. I mean, like, how do you define what Dana does? You don't. Yeah,
you can't. I mean, between Bee and Flower and Insect Arc, it's just
music.
Yeah.
So
I kept you for quite a while here, man. But so where can people find you and follow the music and support you with all the new releases you've got coming out?
Well, my website's lynnwrightcomposer.com. You can find me on, I'm bad about Facebook, but I am on there. But if you look up my name on Instagram, there's also an And the Wireman page, but basically I'm funneling more and more through my own.
Okay.
Will be Sonambula Music on Bandcamp is where I'm going to be putting out some of these new ambient releases, and then just under the different band names. Okay. But my website will have links to everything, and that way you don't have to go through the whole list of stuff I just threw at you. So,
well, that's awesome. And I feel like we've kind of been circling. And I'm finally glad to get you on the podcast. And
yeah, Grant mentioned, he said, hey, this guy loves to talk to you. And then he mentioned that you knew Ballroom Dance is Dead. And I was like, what? We put that out and didn't even do much publicity for it. It's sold a few hundred copies. It's just.
I don't even have a copy of it. I got to get that because I don't have a physical copy.
I'll send it to you.
Oh my gosh!
I'll find one. I think there's one around now. It's on CD. It's not on vinyl. But
I love CDs. Okay, I have 4,000 behind me. You can't see them, but
right. Okay, good. So I'll send you one of those, or I'll bring it. I'll write you and get your info and
awesome.
send it to you.
Thank you so much.
that's Yeah, Grant and I are finally gonna make another one this coming year.
Oh, I mean, almost forgot. He actually mentioned that to me when we were recording. So that I'm so glad, because that, to me, when I found that, that was just, oh gosh, it was just such a find for me. It's become one of my favorites. I absolutely love that.
We just did that with this guy, Tony Nazero, a drummer. We grabbed him. He played in a band called Drums and Tuba, which is funny. It's tuba and drums and electronics. And he's, I mean, this has nothing to do with it, but he's an amazing drummer. And we, seriously, I think Grant came up here. We went to rehearsal space for an afternoon. I went down to New Orleans. We went to rehearsal space for afternoon. Then we rehearsed with him once. And then we walked in the studio and we just cut it. And the rule was it was live, and on the songs where there's like a few overdubs, you had to do the overdubs in a take. So there was no punching in, nothing. It was just performances. And so we just do a few takes of each song until we choose the one that we just wanted. And really, we just did it for ourselves. We're just like, we hadn't worked together and quite a while, and we just wanted to do something. And that was kind of around that time we were working on some other stuff. That was our reconnecting. So it was, it meant a lot to me. And, but I think the next one will actually not be as lazy about it. And it's the one side of doing too many projects. You sometimes move on before you should.
Yeah, I can understand that. Well, man, thank you so much.
Thanks. I hope I didn't blab too much.
No, this has been fantastic. Seriously, I have been a huge fan since the first album came out, My Love, Sex, and Spirit. The first James Hall came out.
Great.
Feeling of Hope is just, seriously, it's one of my favorite songs of all time.
The funny thing about Feeling of Hope is we were recording in this old Nashville studio.
Yeah.
It still had all the 70s decorum. But the best echo in the whole place was the bathroom. But somebody had a glass shelf with all of these glasses on it in the bathroom. Don't ask me why. And we put an AC-30 in there because we recorded most of that. Like, we would track mostly live, and the basic guitar, bass, drums were just live takes. But we were running out of time, and we're on tape, and so we're doing all the guitar overdubs, and and I don't know, I've been recording for 16 hours, and it's like, we got to get the guitar solo on Feeling Hope, and so they just cranked that amp up, and then I don't know why we didn't hear it, but we go in there to turn it back down, and all the glasses had bounced off the shelf. It was, I'm like, I hope, fortunately no one sent a bill or anything.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And this has been a blast.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm glad we did it. And,
me too.
Yeah, I just realized after Grant told that, I'm like, wait a minute. He's had 5 people I know on the show, and now between Dana, Grant, James, and Norm, and people I've worked with, and so good. Thanks for letting me interrupt your night.
Oh gosh, Lynn, thank you so much for coming on. I'm so glad we did this, and I'm gonna let you go get some rest now.